I think everyone has a seat now, and so we want to welcome you to our diversity awareness meeting tonight. And I like to start with acknowledging all those who've gone before us and cleared our path, but especially the Duwamish tribe upon whose land we stand. And so tonight we have a very special guest with us, and Joan and Bill and Wes, we thank you all for getting this beautiful program together. And Joan Singler, thank you so much for organizing this. And Joan will be introducing our speaker, Martha.
Well, thank you all for being here. This is a great turnout. Appreciate everybody coming to learn something that I've been learning about for about the last 6 or 8 months. And you've all read the alert and understand why the Diversity Awareness Committee has invited Marsha Botzer and the credits that are listed in the alert. But in the interest of time, rather than go over those, I just want to quickly read some of her national and local awards for her commitment and dedication to transgenders in the past 45 years. Marsha has served on the Leadership Committee of Equality Across America. She received the Jose Julio Soria Civil Rights Award and the Washington State LGBTQ, that's wrong, TQ, Bar Association Award. She was selected for the inaugural U.S. edition of the Trans 100 list. She received the Gay City Health Community Leadership Award. She was elected to the Martin Luther King County Labor Council, and then at Antioch University, she received the Distinguished Scholar Award and also the Backbone Award from the National Secular Student Alliance. And in 2016, Marsha received the William O. Douglas Award from the American Civil Liberties Union of Washington. So at this point, it gives me great pleasure and an honor to be able to introduce you to Marsha Botzer.
Thank you so much. Oh, all right. So I've got my prepared comments that I want to make. But first, I just want to say thank you so much for welcoming here. I just had one of the best dinners. I generally do not eat before I talk, that's for sure. But tonight, couldn't stop. I was sitting with these wonderful folks hearing the story, learning more about this fabulous place. So just wanted to say that before getting going, all right? Okay, so I do have these prepared remarks. Yes, they're a little formal. But let me go through those. But here's the challenge. When we get to the question and answers, I really want you, if you want to and if you're willing, to just go ahead and ask whatever it is. In fact, I offered the other challenge, so I better offer this to you. If you can ask me a question that I won't answer, you win a prize. Well, okay, there's a few caveats, but not many. All right, okay. So let me do this, and we'll get on with it. So Marsha Botzer, she and her, I tell you, coming here was like visiting a home. It's like arriving in a sweet port after a long voyage. And I wrote that before I even knew it was absolutely the truth. And it certainly is. Oh my goodness. But it is. It's a busy place. It's got remarkable residents. I've met a number of folks here. Plenty of books. I love that. And some excellent dinners. Oh, yes. You know, it makes me think, where am I going to wind up? All right. Okay. So thank you. Deep thanks for your interest in understanding the pressures, the attacks, and disturbances arrayed against trans youth and trans adults in these days of confusion and accusation. I am fully aware that there may be people in this audience here tonight with more knowledge than I have on certain particulars and intricacies of some of the things I'm going to mention. I know that. But with your indulgence, I'll take on this chance and this charge and this challenge and give it a shot if you will join me in that discussion afterwards. So I do often find that I'm using my personal experiences more and more in these kind of chats and talks for my examples. So, caveat, what I say this evening, my various intensities, directions, stories, and recommendations are in the end all mine own. So, with that said, looking around and enjoying my recent tour, I do wish my mom and dad, my mother and father, could be with us tonight to join in this discussion. In 1949, they bought a house up there on Queen Anne. They paid $40,000 for it. It took them nearly 40 years to pay it off. And this is ridiculous, but just a few years ago, I saw that it was up on the market. So I went and I looked. And I got inside and I looked around. I could not believe it. The same pictures that I'd drawn on the walls in the basements were still there. It made me think of things, time and change and so on. And change is something dear to my heart. And it also reminded me that all those years that I spent in that home before leaving, I was engaged in, without knowing it, the process of trying to understand this feeling of body not matching sense of self. I had no words for it. I had no way to even really think clearly about it, but it was certainly there when I drew that picture in the basement. Oh, and now I looked just the other day for fun. What's that house going for? It was selling for $2 million a couple years ago. What's it going for now? $4 million, which is ridiculous. And also makes me think, oh, if only. But, well, let's see. In that house, much more than any money value or any nostalgia value, I had a childhood that was quiet. It was a post-war desire for peace and security and safety, I do believe. A time for me that was really a good life, and I am forever thankful for that. It was not one that allowed for much conversation, which is my point. These things that were roiling in me, I had no words for it, but we did not really discuss things personal much in that household. I appreciated that later in life, but at that time, I just know it would have been so nice to be able to chat as I'm chatting with you tonight, not perhaps in these words, more openly. But it was a time when questions of sexual orientation and gender identity were not mentioned at all in my world, except in whisper, disgust, or condemnation. That came later. I didn't even have that in those early years, but that came later. It was let me put it this way. It was a fabled time of secret pain and stunted lives, of hidden gay, lesbian, bisexual, and diverse lives, a closed and silent time without support, that some of today's LGBTQ plus opponents so feverishly wish to bring back. Oh my goodness, we are a long ways from the 1950s and 60s when I was growing up, a long way from that to this welcoming building, this evening, such a long way. It's been achieved by caring people working hard over many years, struggling, fighting, overcoming bias, and facing challenges at every turn, just as we must again in these times. More on that later, because, my friends, when we do fight, we win. So, My quiet childhood ended really as I slipped into the 60s with a Seattle World's Fair, a president assassinated, a war growing, a civil rights struggle in full flourish. I spent some time in Europe, in Paris in 1968. And always, though, in all of that, always, this private, wordless struggle about sense of self. Until one moment in that trip to Europe, I was sitting in San Marcos Square with a bunch of hippie folks, because that's what we did then. And there was some conversation going on. And I heard somebody say to another person, well, you know, I know someone who changed their sex or changed their gender. I don't even remember the exact words, but I nearly died on the spot because I thought I was the only one. I thought that what I was feeling, that this body of mine did not match my deepest sense of self. I thought that that was something that no one else would feel, that must be just so wrong. But no, I heard those words. Well, of course, nothing much could come of that, but I did cut short my time, rushed back here to the States, and looked around. I called doctors, I called anyone. You know, we are a therapist-rich town around here. Therapists, we got them. But back then, not so much. So I could not find anyone. And the few docs I would get a hold of, they'd usually say, well, I don't know anything about what you're talking about. I can't understand that, and be no help, or just slam the phone down. It was a common experience then. Well, now, a world later, after local, national, and international work, some done actually with people sitting here in this room tonight. So I can't go on with some story about a time a while back, because they'll know the truth. They'll know what it is. Now, I don't tell too many stories. I try to stick to the truth as much as I can. But every once in a while, you know, there's temptations. But I'm on the book tonight, that's for sure. But anyway, after all of that, and after creating Ingersoll Gender Center, the proudest thing that I've done, among many things, 50 years old now and still serving the trans and wider community. We have a support group that meets every Wednesday night. It hasn't missed a support group in 50 years. Oh, goodness sakes. Anyway, after all this, what might I say about trans and gender and diverse experiences? I can say this. When I meet someone, a queer person, or any person for that matter, I try to remember that I may not be aware. I may not be aware of not knowing, of carrying along assumptions about them. Even after so much time in this movement, oh my goodness, even after all this, I know I may not know. That's a powerful tool, even now. When I'm seeing so many folks, a generation down, another generation down, and somebody comes into one of our support groups, and we were talking about this earlier, and throws out a term, and I haven't heard that term, and I'm sitting there in the support group as the lead of the organization. Well, it's an interesting moment, so I have to know that I may not know, and I'm going to ask about it. That's a powerful tool. And I wish somebody had been around to be able to do that and engage me in conversation all those years ago. Well, here's an example of not knowing. It's a light one, but see what you think. So once, a very long time ago, I was at one of the first conferences about gender and identity. I was all set. I'd been at it for a couple of days, and I was in the elevator, headed up to the next talk. This one was going to be about transgender. Actually, we didn't even have the word transgender back then. We would have said transsexual or something like that. But I got in the elevator. There's only one other person in that elevator with me. And I don't know, I was just tired. And I said, you know what? I just hope that this next speaker knows something, at least something about trans, or I would have said the other words, you know, because, you know, I just, you know the end of the story? Yeah, that was the speaker. So now I have an elevator rule, never, never. But actually, they gave a great presentation. We became good friends, and on we went. But even, you know, being intensely connected with something, I may not know, and I offer that to you just as a thought. So with all these years and 1,000 experiences in my history, it appears to me that a progression of bias and of hate has rippled down the years as anti-LGBTQ, that's lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender questioning, and a plus to include as many others as possible. Those forces have moved from one group to another based largely on how little was known about the group at the time. Because not knowing about a person or a group makes it so much easier to dislike them and brand them other. Oh my goodness. And it seems to me, I own this, it seems to me the progression of opposition has occurred something like this. First, gay men were the dangerous other, unknown in the shadows, easily condemned. Lesbian women followed as voices rose and strong organizations began to appear. Bisexual folks began to find their voices and become another new focus for the opposition. And of course, along with everyone else, transgender and gender diverse people were becoming visible throughout those years, but we had not yet found our time. Not yet at all. Many long evenings with various groups in, oh my goodness, asking the question, why should a trans person be with us in our group? I've got to keep the mic close. You know, I've done those shows like Donahue and all that, and Oprah, I've done those. And they always told me that, and I always forget. So thank you. And do it again, please, to make sure I keep it close. All right. Where was I? Let's see. The complexities of the expanding, in my opinion, the expanding queer panoply infuriated the opposition because the leaders could not as easily attack us when there were so many different movements and parts of the movement. A guy named Lon Mabon down in Oregon was an activist against the community, and they'd been very successful passing some nasty laws in Oregon. Nasty in the sense that they would prevent people from expressing themselves or even getting help. And I met a person, this wonderful Charlie Bryden, who invited me to join Washington Citizens for Fairness, just starting, and Hands Off Washington, and we fought together to defeat the attacks here in Washington State that person brought. We created some groundbreaking initiatives. We created new policies, new actions. In fact, we were the first state ever to bring an initiative to try to win rights for the LGBTQ community. We lost, but it was a powerful binding experience. It was. And here's the story I want to tell. I was there, but I was the only trans-identified person, at least the only one speaking out. And we'd been through those conversations I mentioned a while ago. But I remember one particular Saturday when we were discussing whether or not this initiative was going to go forward. And we'd been told that probably if we talked about trans, this thing would go down like a bomb rocket. And in fact, that was such a scary thought that what happened next was something I'll remember forever, and that is that during a long conversation, that group of folks, primarily lesbian and gay folks, said, we're going together. We're going together no matter what. And we lost, but not because trans was there. Oh, so many other reasons. Okay, I wanted to mention that because it's so important that we be heard. It's true for everybody. It doesn't have to be LGBTQ. Everybody, at least everybody I've encountered, at some point wants to be heard. And that's something that was missing for me. I've made, I think, that point. I won't go any farther and bother with that. But today, with the public appearance of transgender and gender diverse people, the opposition has found their latest and least understood group. So it is. Transgender is now at the tip of the opposition's spear, and all that is deemed wrong is settled upon our heads with the mean hope that this time the whole LGBT community will be silenced by a vigorous and vicious assault upon gender and identity. So, what are some of the things to know about the transgender experience? Well, what is it? Is it real? Yes, that's a question. Is it real? And I asked that question of myself in my feelings all those years ago. Can I even feel this? Is this real? Yes, my friends, it is real. And I actually have some empirical evidence to show you a little later, and not just me going on saying that. But it's a question I want to start with here because it's powerful. When you don't believe something is real, you can act differently about it. So, what is it? Well, we keep learning. But transgender, at its most basic, is about the internal understanding of self and the external presentation of the self. And you can link that to your own concept, whatever it may be, when you think at 3 in the morning about life and what it all means, and you think self, you think me, it's that deep. It's that deep. So that's why neither you nor I could ever make a trans person out of anybody. If it isn't there, it isn't there. And nobody wants to. Nobody wants to do that. I have a few more words on that in a moment. But, okay, what is it? External, and so on. I told you that. With transgender people, we can be sexual. Oh, yes, we can be sexual. But being trans is not about sex. It's about identity. And I say that because often oppositions will cast transgender and gender diverse folks, like myself, as a broken form of sexuality, a bias that takes on political and social power, just as it has in the past when it attacks all those other groups I mentioned. And it's a dangerous, dangerous power. So what expressions do these identities take? Most often, trans has the characteristic of a lifelong experience, an internal sense of self that's at the core of personal identity and any concepts of gender. You know, for young children, there's no complicated set of descriptive words like I'm using or like any of us might use in our discussions. No theories, none of that. But there is an expression of gender, and it's solid and it's there, and it may not be accepted by those around them. So how that self is allowed to be expressed as they get older can be different depending on where they are and what culture they're in or what the ideas are, but it's there, as strong as any of our own. Now, I haven't read the whole article. I just got my copy of the New Yorker, and there's an article in there. How about that? I mean, they've done trans before, but this one's a nice long article about somebody who actually has to move out of the state they're in because they can't get the services that they need, and their parents, and how they're getting on and all. Now, if there had been something, and I could have had a conversation like that, I know my parents would have helped and talked, but we hadn't those words. So, what is wanted by trans and gender diverse people? What do we want? Everything, oh my goodness, that most other people want. Pretty simple, pretty darn simple. Peace, civil rights, a chance to live as well as we possibly can, or simply the opportunity to be the person's self at school. Oh, I want to add these other notes, though. For the book, trans and diverse are not aspects of madness or mental illness. Trans and diverse are not some modern form of ideology. I laughed when I first heard somebody going on about that, gender ideology. But no, it's a dangerous meme that's out there now. But it isn't. It isn't anything like that. These human identities are person-centered, and they do not proselytize or convert or indoctrinate, and they're not political and they're not religious, even though a lot of bias out there condemns us on those kinds of levels. Trans and diverse are not other. They are common human experiences of identity. So I've been really lucky, I kind of hinted at that earlier, to be invited around the world to do this kind of work and to meet others. And I've seen these claims that I'm making validated in the flesh, as well as the empirical evidence. So from New York to Beijing, from Europe to the Middle East, from North and South, poverty to plenty, the core expressions are always the same. Always the same. So, here are some more thoughts I just want to offer you on moving forward with this discussion. So, I mentioned this, I'll say it again, we're a long way from the 60s, we're a long way from this. I know you can't read it, I'll tell you what it is. It's a blurry printout of a 1966 Seattle Times article which says as its head, Seattle homosexual problem reported to be out of hand. Oh, I like that. I like that language. No, out of hand, out of hand. 1966, gonna clean it up. Yes, there you are. Oh my goodness. So we're a long way from that. When in fact, an article like that, or maybe some pamphlet handed around somewhere, was about as bad as anything publicly could be seen around the issues. In other words, if you ran into something nasty like that, this is about where you see it. Now, things have certainly changed since then. Today, the community is suffering a new and vicious period of revived anti-LGBTQ plus activity, where multiple ideas of threat are presented, where the trembling old ghosts of hate and biased lies rise again, this time playing with the natural love and care for safety that parents and caregivers have for their children. It is disgusting. Old ideas of disease and evil and illness and threat are repackaged in the shiny new clothes of parents' rights language and save them from threats language, delivered again and again through the internet. And while targets of destruction remain the same, the tools of this destruction are changing radically. So, what do current attacks look like? Those old ghosts, those ideas, often veiled, are all still here. The idea that queer people is an umbrella term. Queer people are a dangerous other. The idea that queer people are fully and wholly sexually driven by an oddly perverse need that depends on bringing others into the LGBTQ world. I don't want to bring anybody into anything. But if you want to talk about gender and identity, I'm there with you if you want it. Oh my goodness. The vague idea that there's a mysterious LGBTQ-led objective of destroying people's morals, and the terrible, terrible new insinuation that today all these things and more are somehow menacingly embodied in transgender people. Through constant manipulation, these ideas are being linked to false claims about health institutions, schools, libraries, parents themselves, and, as I say, most horribly, children. They're attacking children. These ideas have been debunked and pre-bunked, as we're often saying now, again and again. No more, no more, no more, no more. We often have thought, at least in my experience, but here it is again. And isn't it strange, incidentally, that incessant lies can sometimes make us believe that others have superior, almost magical powers over us, even down to our core identities? Today, the multiple forms of media are not only different, they also come with a primary difference in appearance and a decades-long, the reason, I'm going to give you my thoughts on the reasons, a decades-long history of building huge infrastructure, massive support from wealthy funders, now provides the opposition with incredible power to influence public decisions. Now, my community has grown as well. The LGBTQ plus community has grown as well. Yes, we have. We have institutions now, but the vast difference in the level of our funding, a continual history of burnout in our volunteers and staffs, a lack of many long-lasting institutions in the community, all of these make us vulnerable in the extreme. We need your help. We really do. In my opinion, I own it, in my opinion, the most effective and therefore the most concerning structural difference in the opposition to LGBT rights and identities has been the creation and use of vast right-wing think tanks that often aid in creating a moral panic. There are organizations like the Alliance Defending Freedom, a $78 million operation, the Heritage Foundation, around $400 million, Family Policy Alliance, and the American Principles Project. They are out there all the time, these institutions, and they can put an academic gloss on anti-LGBT research through books. I've got one of them here, I'll show it to you later. Movies, they do legal trainings, they do conferences, and they are able to outlast us financially in many cases beyond a few generations because we burn each other out. I tell you, it's changing. Yes, it is. Young folks coming in now to volunteer with my organization and with others, young trans folks, so much energy, and I think they have a clearer vision of taking care of themselves, but I'm not sure. I think they're going to burn out, I mean. But we will see. Anyway, that's a huge concern and an issue. Incidentally, another, I don't know if you've heard the name Leonard Leo, but this guy is largely responsible for the condition of the Supreme Court. And he was at a Federalist. Well, the other day I heard an interview with this individual, and what was the example that they used? Trans. They used transgender as a reason for keeping them energized in their work. My goodness. We've advanced that far. Well, I don't want us to advance that far. Okay, these institutions argue against us. They carry their work into the courts. They outline legal strategies against us, develop political and legislative ideas to eliminate us. I've heard that word used more than once, even in the federal Congress, eliminate us. They produce items quickly, distribute them widely, and they often have associated authors and presenters available to enter into debates. So the materials, maybe even more important, are picked up by provocateurs on the internet, where debasing transgender is now top of many opposition lists. A few years it was not, it is now. Examples of those are Libs of TikTok, Moms for Liberty, GenSpect, and the American College of Pediatricians, which sounds so benign and kind, and you just want to pet it on the head, but the fact is that's a group of folks who want conversion therapy, that is the destruction of the concept of yourself, in place and so on. Anyway, all these projects appear to me to function by taking the old hates, packaging them in new ways, and together they brought us something else that's brand new, something else that we all have to face each and every day, the unprecedented coordination of legislative activity. This is the use of model legislation that focuses on the LGBTQ community and now primarily on trans. It functions to gather together angers as well as attack trans people, because it always will eventually link to other bête noirs, for example, abortion. But they attack libraries, school boards, reproductive rights, social organizations, individuals. I was just reading about another presentation that nominally is supposed to be a healthcare issue, but is tacking in a provision that would eliminate trans health care. So think of this. Over the last 2 years, there have been at least 700 anti-LGBTQ bills presented across this country of ours. Around 250 of those were directed primarily at trans folks. And they're put out there by groups like the American Legislative Exchange Council, Liberty Council, Project Blitz, that has the tagline, Christian Nationalists Taking America Back for the Old Testament. I'd like to go to lunch. Take me to lunch. That'd be a lot more fun. So what can we do? What is needed right now? First, just this. Know that there is nothing to fear from a queer person, nothing to fear from a trans person, nothing at all. It's so simple. We have all, however, been pummeled with the anti-trans messages, especially around children, that we must actively deal with these every single day. These messages and the fears create bias that enter into every part of the service world, whether it be the law or healthcare, all the things I've mentioned. So, second on my short list of what we might do, we all need to support families with trans children. I'll show you some of those later. But there's organizations like Gender Odyssey, a wonderful group, Lambert House right here in Seattle, Parents and Friends, that is PFLAG, great organizations that are right there willing to help immediately. We need to support institutions and individuals that are under attack. For example, those schools, those libraries, those healthcare providers. And also such things as projects that help build anti-racist organizations. They're receiving attacks that can be based in a trans attack. So bizarre. My goodness sakes. Public broadcasting that remains evidence-based, that's under attack. Local providers that are boycotted. One of our physicians boycotted by folks who literally had no idea what was going on, but had their signs that were printed elsewhere and boycotted this poor physician's practice. My goodness, he was so scared, so scared. And indeed, one more, let's protect each other. Because when we are attacked directly, or when we are simply overwhelmed by onslaughts, bad news, or frustration, let's have someone we can turn to. You've got it here, I can see that, but use it. We need strong civil rights and strong protections for the existing civil rights that we have. For public accommodations, all the things I've mentioned, I won't say them again. And you know how to get there. I'm sure, pretty sure from what I've heard from others, you know how to get to those lists. You know how to follow the legislature. You know how to get out there and testify if you want, if you can. All those things, but they're now more important than ever around these issues. If you say nothing else, but don't be afraid of it, that sort of thing. We need to continually monitor identity documents. A little while ago, I went up to talk to some attorneys in Canada, and I crossed the border like that. And actually, the person leaned out of their booth, and they say, "Oh, are you going up to talk to them at lawyers, is that?" And I said, "Why, yes, I am, as a matter of fact." And there was no question about gender identity. That was not the case not so long ago. It was thanks to an immense amount of work over many years that my passport, my driver's license, and all my documents can be changed. But that could also change back. Terribly worried that that's going to be coming up next on some of the lists against us. So we need also continued attention to safety and policy. In employment, workspaces, unions close to my heart, healthcare providers, I mentioned that, and the police. The same constant attention is needed in insurance issues. Insurance, oh, I'm sure I could hear a story or two about insurance here if we chatted over coffee somewhere. But where it fits into this discussion is that there are now denials of service when trans is included. There are also immense amounts of misinformation. Sometimes we think we've got it all figured out. Someone will call the hotline at the hospital or wherever it is and get the wrong information from whoever answers that phone. That sort of thing is happening quite a bit, working hard on that. And we also have outright rejections of coverage. Those are rising as well as costs. So we must support family reproductive services, especially like Planned Parenthood, for example, because of the link that's being made between trans and services for reproductive rights. So odd. They want to stop it all. My goodness. Well, and here's an area that's newly developing, ongoing protections for research and service groups, for example, at the University of Washington or others that are doing research. There's a couple of fabulous ones nationally. There's the Williams Institute. There's the MAP project. Those are positive ones, but those are just 2 out of hundreds doing research against our concerns and issues. And overall, here's my last recommendation. Well, with me it won't be the last, but I'll try. A common commitment to oppose authoritarian impulses in our community. Talk to your colleagues and neighbors. You do that, I know that. Talk to the ones, though, that have worked with the queer community. Get their stories. Like you do. I have learned that you have more talks here than most of the institutions I've ever been at. That is terrific. That is amazing. I love it. I am coming here. Okay. So talk to your neighbors. Their stories will enlarge everything that I'm going on about here. And they'll further identify the threats that we are facing. And may I suggest, if you haven't, get to know a trans person or two. So, what resources are available to help in this work? Well, there are so many. And I've mentioned some, and I have a short list. I've got a few paper copies, but I've got the usual electronic copies that I'll make available, and you can have a look at those if you'd like. But there's so many organizations and sources available. So, here's the message. There's so many, and there's so much today. Let's work together, because if you can't find what you need, and I don't provide it tonight, let's work together, we'll find it. So, oh my friends, when in this hard work your mind seeks for understanding, your heart beats for justice, and your voice speaks for truth, there is no greater power. There is no greater power. I named my center after Robert Green Ingersoll, 1833-1899, a person who spoke out for civil rights and justice. And he used to say this: the time to be happy is now, the place to be happy is here, and the way to be happy is to help make others so. Let us do that, and now let us talk. I thank you ever so much. But wait, what have we here? We have resources, the promised resources. Marsha, get them out there. So here's an excellent book, and this will be the list, and if you want, that fabulous library of yours might get them. Just freshly out, Trans Children in Today's Schools, Aidan Key, Gender Odyssey, excellent. How did my pal write a 600-page book? But they did, and it's excellent, and it's quality, and it's just out, an excellent source if you're concerned with family or questions about children and gender identity. Oh, here's one, Where's My Book? It's called that because adults had books, and somebody said, who was younger, said, well, where's my book? So one of our physicians wrote this one. It's directed to youth, but they didn't stop there. They created this, a practical reference for transgender and gender non-conforming adults, which also happens to be packed with just about everything that can be found about the health side of this experience. And Dr. Gromko was right here in Seattle. One of our best physicians came to us at Ingersoll years ago with an open heart and said, I just want to learn. I want to know something about this. Joined us, worked with us for years, brought folks into the practice, has since been training people, doing wonderful, wonderful work. If you want a little of the history of the beginning, what I was talking about, here's a book called Gay Seattle, Gary Atkins, wonderful book for that earlier history. And I did mention some, now these books, incidentally, getting these books I just showed you were monumental undertakings. So hard to find publishers. Some had to be first self-published. So hard to get the money together, to get the time to do it, and all that. And what we're up against in some of those institutions I talked to you about earlier are books like this, When Harry Became Sally, an anti-trans book. Now, nominally, it's just picked up and glanced through a few things. It looks a little academic. The Heritage Foundation published it, one of their research folks. It arms an opposition with, dare I say it, with ignorance. Well, of course I dare say it. And we can't do that. We can't publish tons of books. We can struggle and get some out there, but most often than not, we need to speak to each other about these things. Here's some interesting new work that's going on. This is a book called The Book of Pride, LGBTQ Heroes Who Changed the World. This is from an organization I've recently joined the board of that's called Outwards. It's also online, but it's just the beginning. This also was tough to publish, but here it is. Our state has done a wonderful book called Love, Equality. This is primarily about the marriage fight, but it also contains some material on trans stuff. I admit I'm in it, but it's not focused on trans issues. But the point is, the conversation is opening and getting wider every day. Books like Raising the Transgender Child, a few years old, but also a great one, and so many more. Now, I have in my book here little other props that I was going to show you and fling at you and all that sort of thing, but I won't. I'll just show you this, that when I say, for example, that we have lists. When I say that we have information to validate, say, my claim that this isn't a true identity, there's material from the World Professional Association for Transgender Health, World Association for Professional, oh my God, I was on their board. Oh, anyway, World Professional Association for Transgender Health, which is the international group that's now better part of 45 years old, that does the empirical hard research. If you want to read the methodology, pages and pages of that, and so on. In other words, the group that worldwide does the work that backs up the claims about identity. Also talks about the different forms of the transgender experience from the health side. It's online, free. If you just go there, you can have a look at that. And when someone says, no, this isn't real, or no, that can't be a health truth, you've got something to arm yourself with, if you want to. So there's all of that. When I say some of the things that are going on out there, well, how about this? Family of Missouri trans kid, Jamie Reed, lied about liver damage caused by COVID and the hormone replacement therapy. In other words, we're getting cases coming at us with stories like that have to be defended. So thank goodness there are a number of folks in the legal community ready to protect. Here's one just recent. 19 Republican AGs signed letters citing anti-abortion ruling to target trans adult care. That's that business I was going on about, of mixing ideas together with this pinpoint on trans as the least known and the most easy to feel confused about. I mean, if I'd never heard of it, I might wonder, what? Change? What? How? Of course. But when you find out, all that fades. There's material like this coming from some of the few research groups. This one is from the Movement Advancement Project, MAP, Banning Medical Care and Legal Recognition for Transgender People. So again, I'm not just saying it because I want to say it. These materials can back up those kinds of statements. On and on I could go, but you know what? Let's go to the challenge. Let's do that. You know, I mentioned at the beginning, if you can ask me a question, and I don't mind talking about myself. A lot of us don't do that. I mean, it's not why we are in the world. We're just in the world to be. But I don't mind it at all if you want to do that. And the challenge was, if you can ask me a question that I can't answer, not that I won't, because I'm going to hold something private once in a while. But if you can do that, you win a prize. And the prize used to be this giant chocolate bar. I didn't bring it because no one's ever won it, and it's kind of moldy. But I'll get a new one if you can do that. So, my friends, I don't know how you want to do this, but let's have a chat.
Thank you. I want to say, I'm sure I'm not the only one in this room who has been educated by my queer child and in some cases grandchildren too. But in hearing stories of my daughter who teaches at a high school and tells me about the wonderful transformation of her trans students who are able to begin to live in sync with the gender that they feel they are. And she talks about the depression that falls away and the suicide thoughts that fall away and what a great release it is for them. And then I started to think, well, it's wonderful. It's wonderful that that is possible for them, and it's so important for us to support this. But why is it that the trans people that I know are all at least one, if not two generations younger than I am? What about our generation? There must have been people who wanted to be trans in our generation. And where are they, and what has happened to them, and how have they suffered? Do you know anything about that?
I do a bit. That's a great question. Where are the trans of old, so to speak? I mean, history. They're there. They're absolutely there. And some of the researchers that I am aware of are looking into that. I mean, we were talking about a few examples that came up when I was chatting earlier with folks. One of them, a Civil War soldier, died, discovered that their genitals didn't match their presentation. I mean, we can go way, way, way back. And I'm not at all surprised by that, because think of the depth of their own identity. We haven't changed that much. I mean, we haven't. Not since consciousness, perhaps, or even before. And something is there, unless there is some physical problem that constitutes identity. And tightly packed with that is the is constituted your approach to gender identity. So it's there, and always has been. Now, there have been underground, so to speak, clubs and groups. Somebody just pointed out to me a great story about 17th century clubs, secret clubs, but usually only the rich could afford to be there, but they were clubs. And looking at some of the drawings and so on, I would just say for sure a number of those folks were trans. So they've been there. And I think we're going to be, for those interested, we're going to be very excited by the new scholarship. There's a scholarship that's coming out. I know a couple of younger, finishing their PhD types, who are doing things I cannot imagine, sifting slowly through everything they can find. I love that kind of mind. And they're the ones who are going to bring us those answers that will solve that question. The books will be coming. Yes, there's another.
My wife and I had a chance to meet and work with the gay community in Everett during the AIDS crisis, and we also worked with the drag queen community. And none of the drag queens ever identified as trans. They all identified as gay men. Can you help me understand why that is?
Yay, another great question. Yes, drag queens and identity. Well, think of it, let's see, think of it like this. The identity will just be very simple here. The identity, male. The incredible fun and joy and excitement of dressing beautifully in a culture that doesn't often permit it, but dressing beautifully, acting, doing your skills, whatever it may be, living out that dream. But it doesn't automatically mean that the individual identifies as a feminine being, well, a female being, let's say. Maybe feminine in appearance in whatever culture it might be. And as I mentioned, I've been in those other cultures, and sometimes the drag queens in other cultures are quite amazing. But in any event, that would be the key. I guess I could be a drag king if I wanted to. But my identity would still remain that. Yeah, it's we always get into this. It's all that research that I'm talking about. That's the place to go if you want to go beyond me using just the word identity. But for me, the point that's most easily understand is my one about identity. So identity, in this case, male mostly, most times, but a great desire for expression. So. And then, if you have a good friend and you feel comfortable and they feel comfortable, have a conversation. Because indeed, some folks, yes, maybe that was their only outlet and the only way to express their feminine self, and maybe they are on a path for transition, but that's something that maybe they would share with you. Yeah. Yes.
Would you speak to what is entailed in transitional surgery? Having read going to Trinidad and realizing you can't just walk in and say, I want to be female or I want to be male, that it's a big process. Could you talk to that?
Oh, absolutely. Thank you for that question. Yes, one of the worst memes out there is that somebody can just walk in and say, give me hormones, the drugs that are related to some parts of body development and so on. No, you can't. Maybe you could find them like any underground drug, but no, that's not how it happens. And does someone walk in and just do a surgery? No, that doesn't happen. And the Trinidad that we're talking about was Trinidad, Colorado, where a great surgeon, a guy named Stanley Biber, got out of Korea. He was a MASH surgeon there, one of those super surgeons that you find in war settings. And he went to work in Trinidad, Colorado, because there was a mining things were there, and there were a lot of injuries. And he would patch people up. And one day a social worker came in and sat down and said, Dr. Biber, can you do my surgery? And he said, well, sure, I can do it. And she says, well, back then it would have been, I'm transsexual. And he says, what's that? Now, the reason I can tell a story like that is I got to know Dr. Biber really well over many years of working with him. But what he did was he wrote to some friends in New York who'd done some experimental surgeries. He got hand drawings, and then he spent years perfecting the surgeries. But to get to Dr. Biber required years of psychotherapy, a potload of letters with names on them from individuals who could be verified as PhD or greater. Sometimes in the early years, a required 1 to 3 year living fully and wholly in the role to which you are transitioning before you could get any of it. Now, that doesn't exist anymore, because think of that. That's almost madness itself, because you need some sort of help. You can't just do these things on your own with nothing. So let me get clear. What you would need in those days was to find a therapist who would be willing to work with you long enough so that they would put their name on a document saying you could have, that you would benefit from receiving hormones. That might take years. As far as surgeries go, surgery doesn't make a man or woman out of anybody. It just confirms something that's already there. But that's why it was fairly crude about the how do you prove that, because those were the words that were used back then. And so somebody living the role over a long period of time was supposed to prove that. But what we know now is that it's really the analysis of self and identity. And so the therapists that exist today, they have been trained now years in that skill and that art of having that conversation over and over and over again. Letters are still needed these days, but there are different approaches to them. There are, in the best of cases, not in any way a gatekeeping process, but a self-expansion process, so that when someone finally does go to surgery, Dr. Biber, incidentally, is long gone, but what an interesting person he was. But today, if you go to surgery, it's after all of this sort of thing before you even get near it, and you don't go to it. I would not go to it thinking, I'll finally be me after this. I'm me now. That will, for some people, complement and make the body align with the sense of self. And not everyone will do it. There are gradations of identity, if you will, and some people are perfectly happy. It's some other part of the presentation spectrum. But for trans folks, it will, if possible, usually result in some sort of surgical change. It's just pretty simple to get, I think, if we think about you waking up tomorrow morning, looking in the mirror, and there is the other gender, if there is only one other, and there's probably a lot more, looking back at you. And were that the case, you would probably be able to go put some kind of clothes on and go, down to the meeting and all that, but people would look at you, and you would not feel right at all. So imagine if someone said, we're going to take you, throw you on a surgery table, do all kinds of surgery to you. You're not going to wake up a man or a woman or anything but you. So that's the key to that. I so appreciate you saying that. Trinidad was remarkable. It was a liminal experience in the sense that here's this little mining town down in the southeast corner of Colorado. And here, surgeries that astounded the world were occurring. And so I went back to school, got my degree in counseling psychology, and was able to write some of those letters. But whenever my clients would want me to, I would go with them down there to Trinidad and be with them during those transitions. Yeah, thank you for asking that one. Let's see, who was first?
Okay, this, the Horizon House Library has a copy of this book,
Oh, yeah.
Going to Trinidad.
Hello. Is a trans person is a trans person legally the sex that he or she chooses?
Did you get together and think of these great questions? That's perfect. So let me see if I can revise it. Is a trans person, are we legally our gender? Yes. But there's a process there that's many years in the making. For example, I couldn't change those documents that let me cross the border without years and years and years. Well, here, I'll give you an example. The driver's license in this state has a gender marker. Not all driver's licenses everywhere do, but they do have a gender marker. So it took years to get the ability to change that gender marker, years. And when I first sat down with state officials and we had the first conversation about changing gender markers, we sat there and then one person said, "But how will we know who you are?" And I thought, that's an existential question. That really is. But we worked it through because the R-ness doesn't have to do with that letter. It has to do with the full self. So a process that includes documentation, like with the therapy, documentation of the surgery, all of that is required, and documents then at the passport, driver's license, birth certificate level can be changed. So yes, and thankfully so, because those documents are still, and maybe will become, much more valuable in the sense of protection. Thank you for asking.
I was originally going to ask, is transgender synonymous with homosexual? But one is much more inclusive than the other one, right?
So the difference between transgender or transsexual and
No, transgender and homosexual.
transgender and homosexual.
Yeah.
All right. Let me put it this way. Oh, and forgive me, folks, because I put up a simple statement. It's that homosexual, sexual relations. Transgender, identity. Doesn't have anything to do with sex.
Okay.
Now, the fact is humans are humans. We're all complicated. So I can be sexual, but my core identity is a woman, who I am. That's for me. That's how I identify. Yeah. Oh, I think we're approaching a time, or... Oh no, we're just...
I want to say that I met you at least 20 years ago at Bellevue PFLAG. And I think I have some advice for the wise people in this room. And that is, we have children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren. And we can make them comfortable coming out to us because we're trusted elders. And so one of the ways, I do sometimes a little lie, but if I want my children to feel comfortable that they might want to say something, I'll say something like, well, the gay couple down the street, I just love that they're taking care of their yard, or what, you make up a little story about them. And so if they have some questions about that, they know that I'm a safe person to come to. And so trying to set up a place for trans and gay, lesbian, bisexual people to come out to us, because usually our grandkids like us a lot. And they want, and this way we can give a safe space for them and for for other children that they're playing with. If you just kind of drop in a little something, you're taking a risk, but it's some way to do an activism that helps these kids.
Brilliant, brilliant, brilliant. Thank you so much. Yes, just an atmosphere of love and comfort on your side too. I mean, there might be places where you don't want to bring out the conversation, but if you can, and you see, especially for the younger ones who don't have all this talk and all these ideas, they're just being, and if they hear you welcoming, it's part of the exploration, and it can't turn them trans. Don't worry about it. I really have to let you know, we can't do it. We can't do it. Just can't. So
I'm a little slow. I'd like to know, on your driver's license and your passport, does it say T for trans, or what does it say?
Oh, good question, yeah. For the passport, no, it uses the usual things like F and M. Yeah, now in this state, we have actually another group of people, I was in part of this, but not much of it, have moved to the point where if someone wants to use X, that is not identify as either male or female, that is possible in this state. But again, you have to go through a lot of paperwork. A lot of paperwork. But c'est la vie, that's life.
Marsha, can you talk to the excuse that's being used in state legislatures that children who are not comfortable with the sex they were born with should not have treatment until after they're 18?
Yes, treatment, ages, that sort of thing. Again, I would, first of all, for the facts of that matter, I'd refer you to the World Professional Association for Transgender Health and the section on youth. But imagine your own self thoroughly repressed. You would, I hope, want to try and do something about it. And in some very rare cases, younger folks do receive some kind of treatment, for example, puberty blockers, which actually slow down the process of puberty for a while, a couple of years, give people a little extra time to think through things. But these, I often have heard charges that, oh my God, they can just walk in and give somebody surgery or cut off their breasts or do some, horrible talk. That doesn't happen. You can't do it unless it's, you find some illegal surgeon somewhere in a garage. And I certainly hope no one would ever do that. So no, those, in very, very rare cases, a younger person can receive certain kinds of medical care like hormones, but it's usually the result of a massive effort by a number of therapists and physicians, that sort of thing. That's what happens. So yeah, let's face up to that threat. You'll hear it over and over again, that somebody can just ask for these things and get them. No, you can't. Now again, you can get anything out there in the world if you've got money, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about the average trans person. And what they're going to do, just like this article I started reading in the New Yorker, they're not going to want to talk about it at all. In fact, I only read the start, but it sounded like the trans child, well, I guess I can say that, in the very early teens, doesn't want to talk about it at all, just wants to get through it, just wants to get on with life. So mom is helping out, and they can't stay in the state they're in because services are being banned. So they're going to move and find a state like Washington that can help. But it'll be a long process, and that's the road they're on.
Jean, do you have
Anybody over here?
well, one more? We'll take one more question.
In a discussion the other day, someone said that in Washington, men who are in prison only need to say that they are a woman to be transferred to the women's section of the prison. Is that correct?
No. You'll hear all those kinds of things. What's recently been decided is that folks can receive some treatment, and I just wonder if this is actually going to happen, because I've been working on jails and prisons for a long time, and just to try and get some help there, like a counselor or something. Now that's supposed to be the case, but we'll see if it happens. No, that's not going to happen, because that raises, the reason that's mentioned is it raises the old threat. We're going to throw a dangerous male in with women. Boy, I don't know. They never say the other way around. But that's the danger. It's the one that just goes maybe the deepest to our hearts and minds. And so that's the one that's thrown out as the fear. Oh, yeah, it's very sad. And if all we ever say is that, no, it doesn't work that way, that's help. Thank you.
Okay.
Oh, goodness, thank you, my friends.
Yes, could we just have a round of applause for Marsha?
And Marsha, I want to thank you so much for joining us tonight. And we hope you'll come back and have lunch or come speak to us again down the road. And again, thank all of you for attending. It's been a wonderful evening of knowledge again. and learning and sharing with each other. We thank you all for coming. And let's give another hand to the wonderful woman here.